Ever think about ruling a place you've never even been to? I mean, the Tudors did that with Ireland for over a century. Crazy, right?
Yeah, talk about a long-distance relationship. It's a weird situation. They had so much power over Ireland, but never went there? Wild.
It's like trying to take care of a garden, but from across an ocean. You might have like these big plans, but who knows what's actually going on? And that's exactly what we'll look at in this deep dive, the complicated relationship between the Tudors and Ireland.
Yeah, we've got some cool sources, accounts from back then, interpretations of what happened, even a new manuscript, the Hatfield Compendium, gives some great insight into Elizabethan policies.
Perfect. So picture this.
Yeah.
1485, Henry VII, first Tudor king. What's going on in Ireland then?
Well, it wasn't like starting fresh. When Henry VII came to power, England and Ireland, already a long history there. Centuries of conflict and power struggles back and forth. After those Norman invasions, you had these powerful Norman lords setting up their own little kingdoms in Ireland, always fighting with the Gaelic Irish, who had their own traditions and laws.
So it was already kind of a mess before the Tudors showed up.
Oh, yeah. And for Henry VII, he was pretty new on the scene. England was one thing, but Ireland was a whole other challenge. I mean, he was a nobody there. And the place was full of people loyal to the Yorkists, the family he'd just defeated.
Yikes. That's got to be a tough crowd.
For sure. And get this, the Gaelic Irish, they didn't even call him King Henry. They called him the son of the Welshman. Like, ouch. Really shows how they felt about him and his claim to the throne.
So not exactly a warm welcome. So how did Henry VII handle all of this?
He had a two-part plan, discovery and reform. Discovery meant gathering information, like trying to figure out what this place was all about. And reform meant bringing back what the English saw as a golden age, when they had way more control over Ireland.
So he wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel, just go back to an older model.
Exactly. Henry VII was looking to the past, wanted to reassert English power in a place that had gotten way too independent for his liking. He relied on advisors he trusted and envoys to do his bidding, guys like Sir Richard Edgecombe. He was sent to Ireland in 1488 to get oaths of loyalty from the Anglo-Irish lords.
And Edgecombe's writings are pretty interesting. They give you a real sense of what he was up against.
Oh, yeah, totally. He ran into a society that was totally divided by ancestry and loyalty. You had the English of Ireland, descended from earlier settlers. They were their own group within Irish society. Can you imagine navigating that? Your family history determines who you're loyal to and where you fit in.
Sounds like a political nightmare. So did Henry VII get what he wanted in Ireland?
Well, he didn't get total control, but he did stabilize things, and that was a pretty big accomplishment given the mess he inherited. But it was his son, Henry VIII, who really took a, much stronger approach to Ireland.
Oh yeah, things definitely heat up with Henry VIII. You know the guy, big personality, breaks from the Catholic Church, and of course brings that same energy to Ireland.
That's one way to put it. Henry VII was all about caution. But Henry VIII? Total opposite, way more assertive, even aggressive. And violence increased a lot in Ireland under his rule, more than anyone could remember.
And he wasn't just some king giving orders from far away. Henry VIII really wanted to control Ireland personally.
Absolutely. He was all over it. And then there was the Kildare Rebellion, led by Silken Thomas, the Earl of Kildare. It was a huge power grab that went wrong and ended up destroying the Kildare family. They were a major force in Anglo-Irish politics for centuries.
That must have freaked out all the Anglo-Irish nobles.
No kidding. This wasn't just a little squabble. It was Henry VIII showing everyone who's boss. Made him rethink his strategy, though. And that's where we get the whole surrender and regrant thing.
So was surrender and regrant? Sounds kind of backwards.
Basically, the Irish lords had to give up their lands and titles to the king, but then they got them right back as grants from the king. Sounds pointless, right? But it was all about symbolism, power dynamics.
So it was Henry VIII saying, look, you can have these lands, but they're mine. You're just borrowing them.
That's it. He was basically saying, you rule because I let you.
What the Irish lords think of that? Did they see it as like a slap in the face? Or was it more like, okay, fine, this is how we got to play the game now?
That's a great question, and historians have different takes on it. For a long time, Irish nationalist historians saw surrender and regrant as a sneaky way to take power from the Irish lords. But more recently, historians are saying it wasn't that simple.
So there's more to it than just England bullying Ireland.
Exactly. Some historians think that both Henry VIII and a lot of the Irish lords went along with this because it was practical. Henry VIII wanted to lock in his control. And the Irish lords, maybe they weren't thrilled, but They saw it as a way to get on the king's good side and keep their power as things were changing.
Sounds like both sides were trying to make the best of a sticky situation. Any examples of how this played out in real life?
Definitely. Take Con O'Neill. He was a powerful Gaelic lord. He decided to play ball with Henry VIII, started dressing like the English, even got the title Earl of Tyrone.
Big change from being a Gaelic lord.
It was a huge compromise, but there was a flip side. He got recognition and maybe some perks being part of the Tudor system. And you know what? When he went back to Ireland, they say his people treated him with a ton of respect, so it wasn't seen as him selling out.
Interesting. Not every Irish lord saw this as being forced on them then.
Right. And for Henry VIII, having these powerful Irish lords bow down to him, even if they had their own reasons, it fed his ego, made him feel like a big, powerful ruler, unifying everything, helped him look totally legitimate, like he was the true ruler of Ireland, no question.
It's amazing how personal stuff like that affects history so much.
It really does. And you see it a lot with the Tudors, especially Henry VIII. But it wasn't just about power games and politics. Religion was a big deal, too. The English Reformation really mixed things up between England and Ireland.
Ah, yes. The Reformation. Henry VIII ditching the Catholic Church and starting his own Church of England must have been a big deal in Ireland.
Oh, yeah, huge. It added a whole new layer of tension to an already complicated relationship. It's a fascinating story, and one we'll dig into more in just a bit.
So Henry VIII, changing everything in England, ditching the Catholic Church, and now he's got his sights set on Ireland. Wants to bring his religious changes there, too.
Exactly. Being king wasn't enough for him. He wanted to be the head honcho of the church, too. And the Irish Sea wasn't going to stop him.
But Ireland. Super Catholic, not exactly the best place to bring Protestant ideas.
You got it. They introduced those Reformation laws in Ireland in the 1530s through the Irish Parliament. And remember, surrender and regrant. Part of that was the Irish lords had to say bye-bye to the Pope and pledge loyalty to Henry VIII as the big cheese of the church.
I bet a lot of Irish folks were not happy about that.
Nope. Some lords went along with it, maybe figured it was the smart move, or wanted to stay on the king's good side. But outside the Pale, that's the area around Dublin where English influence was strongest, there was a lot of pushback.
So now religion's another thing dividing England and Ireland.
Totally. And that division, it would stick around for a long, long time.
Okay, so time passes. Henry VIII kicks the bucket. His daughter, Elizabeth I, takes over in 1558. What's her take on Ireland? More hands-on than her dad.
Well, as far as actually going there, nope. Elizabeth never set foot in Ireland either, just like her dad and granddad. But that doesn't mean she ignored it. She had advisors, especially William Cecil, her main guy. He gave her all the info and helped her make decisions about Ireland.
Wow. Making huge decisions about a whole country, based on reports and letters, without ever seeing the place themselves.
It's crazy, right? Being so far removed definitely affected their views and policies. And speaking of understanding how Elizabeth handled Ireland, that's where the Hatfield Compendium comes in.
That's that manuscript that belonged to William Cecil.
Right.
It gives us a peek into how things worked back then.
Exactly. Bunch of documents, some from the 1400s even. Shows us how the Tudor monarchs got information about Ireland, what they did with it. The whole 9 yards.
Any juicy details in there?
What? It's surprising how often they used old info. Like there's this document from 1494. It lists how strong the Irish lords' armies were. And guess what? They were still using the same numbers in Elizabeth's time. Like 100 years later.
No way. It's like they were stuck in the past, trying to apply old solutions to new problems.
It does seem that way, looking back instead of looking forward, trying to bring back the good old days instead of adapting to reality.
So did Elizabeth basically do the same stuff as her dad in Ireland then? Or did she try something new?
Well, she definitely wanted control over Ireland, just like her dad. But she was maybe a bit more flexible, more practical, unlike Henry VIII. She didn't force the Irish lords to completely abandon their traditions.
Oh, she's a little softer? Tried a bit of carrot and stick?
You could say that. But Elizabeth still had problems in Ireland, especially with those powerful Gaelic lords. They didn't like the English pushing their way in. And a great example of this is Shane O'Neill. He was a big deal, wanted power and recognition within the Tudor system.
His story is like the perfect example of how messed up things were between the English and Irish. Tell us more about him.
Oh, Shane O'Neill. Total character. Powerful Gaelic lord, super proud of his Irish heritage, but also really ambitious, wanted power within the English system. On the one hand, he fought like hell against the English, trying to take his power away. They say he refused to even speak English, said it gave him a headache.
Uh-huh. That's one way to make a point.
He knew how to make a statement, that's for sure. But here's the thing. He really wanted an English title, an earldom. Saw it as a way to gain power and be seen as legit. He even went to England. Did the whole formal submission thing to Elizabeth I, knelt before her in her fancy court and everything.
That's been quite a sight.
It was this proud Irish chieftain bowing down to the Queen of England. But guess what? He didn't get his earldom. His relationship with the crown went south, ended in conflict, and eventually he was defeated.
Kind of a tragic story. Big dreams, lots of pride, and in the end, it all falls apart.
Yeah, it's like something out of Shakespeare. And it shows how deep the mistrust ran between the English and Irish, even when they tried to find common ground.
And all that mistrust and clashing cultures led to one of the worst conflicts in Irish history, the 9 Years' War.
Yep, the 9 Years' War, 1594 to 1603. All those tensions and frustrations finally boiled over. Brutal conflict. The English trying to force their way of governing on a Gaelic society that wanted none of it.
And the Irish really suffered during this war, right?
Okay, it was rough on both sides. The English crown spent a fortune, and the Irish. Thousands were killed, entire communities uprooted. But here's the thing, Elizabeth. She didn't see it as a war to conquer Ireland. To her, it was a rebellion against her rightful rule.
So they were pouring resources into subduing the Irish, but they still thought of Ireland as something they'd inherited, not something they were taking over.
Exactly. And that's why, even though they tried so hard, the Tudors never really conquered Ireland in the traditional sense. They had some control, sure, but they never completely dominated the Irish people or wiped out Gaelic culture.
Makes you wonder, was Ireland England's first colony, like some historians say?
That's a tough one. There are definitely some similarities, like using military force and grabbing land. But there are also big differences between what happened in Ireland and what happened later in the New World.
Like how the Irish weren't seen as savages the way Native Americans were?
Right. The Irish were Christian, just a different branch of Christianity. So the English didn't see them as totally uncivilized, and there wasn't that same idea of racial difference that you see later in other parts of the world.
So things were murkier in Ireland. Not as clear-cut who was the colonizer and who was the colonizer.
For sure, it was more about culture than race. Things like clothes, hairstyles, language.
And wasn't there that story about Henry VIII wanting to make everyone in Ireland grow a beard to tell the English and Irish apart?
It sounds crazy now, but it shows how important those little cultural markers were back then, how they shaped how people saw themselves and others.
So even something like facial hair could be a symbol of resistance.
Absolutely. And these little details, they bring history to life, remind us that it's not just about dates and names, it's about real people dealing with big questions, identity, power, belonging.
And so ends the Tudor era. Looking back on this time, what are the main things our listeners should remember? Wow, it's like we went through a whole history book, from Henry VII tiptoeing around to Henry VIII throwing his weight around, and then Elizabeth trying a softer approach.
Yeah.
But still, things were a mess in Ireland.
Yeah, we just skimmed the surface, really. But a few things really stand out, like that constant back and forth. The English wanting control, the Irish resisting. That was a theme throughout the whole Tudor period, and even after.
Like a never-ending tug of war.
Exactly. And the other thing is, it's complicated. Not just a big, powerful country stomping on a smaller one. You had times they worked together, compromised, even some cultural exchange going on, alongside all the fighting and resistance.
Yeah, like Conquest O'Neill, right? Trying to figure out how to keep his power while playing the Tudor game.
He's a perfect example. Personal ambition mixed with those huge historical currents.
And it reminds us that history isn't just events. It's about people making choices, sometimes tough choices. And those choices, they can have consequences for centuries.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Which brings us to what the Tudors left behind in Ireland. It's complicated, and people still debate it.
On one hand, you could say they paved the way for England to control Ireland for centuries, set in motion a lot of things that had some pretty terrible outcomes.
Yeah, but they never really got total control either. The Irish never gave up, always fought to hold on to their culture, their identity. That's a powerful part of this period, too.
And that fighting spirit, it's still there today. So for our listeners who are fascinated by all of this and want to learn more, where should they start?
There's a lot out there. If you want to get a sense of who these people were and what they were like, reading their letters and stuff is amazing, like Elizabeth I's letters, or the records kept by Tudor officials.
And for those who want more analysis, tons of books by historians that dive into the politics and the social stuff and the culture of Tudor Ireland.
Absolutely. And as you dig into all this, think about why these people did what they did. What were they thinking? And what were the long-term effects of their actions? Like that surrender and regrant policy. Was that really about trying to make things work between the English and Irish? Or was it just a sneaky way to grab more power?
Good point. And what about Shane O'Neill? Was he a hero fighting for Ireland, or just a guy looking out for number one?
Those are the questions that make history so interesting. It's rarely black and white. The more you learn, the more you realize how complicated it all really was.
Great point. And I think that's a great place to wrap things up. The Tudors in Ireland. They teach us that history isn't just about dates and names. It's about real people making choices. And those choices affect the world today.
It's been a pleasure talking about this with you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Tudor rule in Ireland. If you like this episode, please subscribe to The Deep Dive for more journeys into history. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic, ready to explore it all with you.